The discovery happened on a quiet Thursday morning in March, when Ronaldo returned home unexpectedly from a canceled training session and found his housekeeper, Anna, sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, surrounded by pill bottles and medical prescriptions that she was studying, with the kind of desperate concentration that suggested someone trying to solve an impossible mathematical equation. And when she looked up with obvious embarrassment at being discovered in what she had assumed would be a private moment of despair, he realized that the woman who had been cleaning his home with meticulous care for 8 years was facing a medical crisis that her modest salary could not address, despite her full-time employment and apparent financial stability that masked the reality of working-class life, where unexpected health problems could destroy carefully maintained budgets and force impossible choices between basic necessities like medicine and food. Ana Ruiz was 64 years old and had been working as a domestic employee for over 40 years, moving from house to house and family to family, while maintaining the professional standards and personal integrity that had made her a trusted presence in homes where privacy and reliability were essential qualities. And her relationship with Ronaldo's family had evolved beyond simple employer-employee arrangements to include genuine affection and mutual respect that had developed through years of daily interaction, shared conversations about family and life, and her obvious dedication to maintaining their home with the kind of care that reflected personal pride rather than mere professional obligation. The medical crisis that had brought Ana to tears involved a combination of health problems that were common among women her age, but had become financially overwhelming when her doctor had prescribed new medications for diabetes, high blood pressure, and arthritis that would cost over €800 per month, even with her basic health insurance coverage. And this amount represented nearly half of her monthly salary from working for Ronaldo's family, plus the additional cleaning jobs she maintained for 2 other households to supplement her income and provide the financial security that a single employer could not guarantee for someone whose age made alternative employment increasingly difficult to obtain. Anna's attempt to manage her medication costs had involved the kind of dangerous compromises that millions of people made when healthcare expenses exceeded their ability to pay, including taking half doses to make prescriptions last longer, skipping doses on days when her symptoms seemed less severe, and researching cheaper generic alternatives that might not be as effective, but were within her financial reach. And her careful calculations about which medications were most essential and which might be delayed or eliminated entirely revealed the cruel reality that effective medical treatment was often a luxury rather than a right for people whose insurance coverage was inadequate and whose incomes were insufficient to bridge the gap between medical needs and available resources. The conversation that followed when Ronaldo asked about her obvious distress was initially hesitant and embarrassed, with Ana apologizing for bringing her personal problems into his home and insisting that her health issues would not affect the quality of her work or her reliability as an employee. But her explanation of her medication costs and the impossible choices she was facing revealed both the dignity with which she approached financial hardship and the systematic problems that affected millions of working people who could not afford the medical care they needed, despite employment that should have provided basic security and access to health care that was considered a fundamental right in developed societies. The immediate solution that Ronaldo offered was characteristically direct and comprehensive, with his insistence that Ana's medical expenses would be covered by his family as part of her employment benefits. But their initial resistance to accepting help revealed the complex emotions that surrounded healthcare assistance and the ways that medical crises could threaten not just physical health, but personal dignity and independence for people who had spent their lives working hard to avoid dependence on others for basic necessities that they believed they should be able to provide for themselves through honest labor and careful financial management that had previously been sufficient to maintain stability and self-respect. The healthcare arrangement that emerged from their conversation involved more than just paying Ana's prescription costs, but included comprehensive medical coverage that would ensure she received preventive care regular checkups, and any specialist treatment that might be necessary to address her health problems before they became more serious and expensive. And this approach reflected Ronaldo's understanding that true healthcare support required addressing underlying conditions rather than just paying for crisis interventions that might have been prevented with earlier and more comprehensive medical attention that was available to people with adequate insurance or financial resources. Ana's gratitude for the medical assistance was expressed through continued excellence in her work and her obvious relief at no longer needing to choose between taking prescribed medications and meeting other financial obligations. And the improvement in her health that followed proper medical treatment demonstrated how access to appropriate health care could transform not just physical well-being, but overall quality of life for people whose previous struggles with medication costs had compromised their ability to manage chronic conditions that affected their energy, mood, and capacity for the activities that provided meaning and satisfaction in their daily routines. The broader awareness that emerged from Ana's situation involved Ronaldo's recognition that many working people faced similar healthcare challenges despite employment that appeared stable and sufficient. And his conversations with Ana about her experiences with medical costs, insurance limitations, and the difficult decisions that millions of people made about healthcare revealed systematic problems that affected entire communities rather than just individual cases of hardship, a chip that could be addressed through personal generosity without changing underlying structures that created healthcare insecurity for working families throughout Spain and other countries where medical costs outpaced wage growth. The foundation program that developed from Ana's case focused on providing healthcare assistance to domestic workers, service employees, and other working people whose jobs did not include adequate medical benefits and whose incomes were insufficient to cover the costs of chronic condition management that required ongoing medication and regular medical supervision. And the program's approach emphasized that healthcare was a basic need that should be accessible regardless of employment status or insurance coverage, while working with medical providers and pharmaceutical companies to establish reduced-cost treatment options for people who earned too much to qualify for government assistance, but too little to afford market-rate medical care. The policy advocacy work that emerged from understanding Ana's situation included support for healthcare reform that would expand coverage for working people, reduce prescription drug costs through better negotiation with pharmaceutical companies, and establish healthcare as a universal right rather than an employment benefit that was dependent on employers' generosity or workers' ability to negotiate for adequate coverage through collective bargaining that was not available to domestic workers and others whose employment was individual rather than collective in nature. The community education component of the healthcare assistance program included information about available resources for people facing medication costs, rights and protections for workers who needed medical leave or accommodation for chronic conditions, and advocacy training that helped working people organize to demand better healthcare benefits and policy changes that would address systematic problems rather than relying on individual charity to fill gaps in social safety nets that should have been comprehensive enough to ensure that employment provided access to basic necessities, including healthcare, that was adequate for maintaining productive and dignified lives. Years later, when Ana had maintained good health through proper medical treatment that had allowed her to continue working well into her 70s, because she enjoyed the structure and social connection that employment provided, when the healthcare assistance program had helped thousands of working people access medical treatment that had previously been unaffordable, when policy changes had improved healthcare access for domestic workers and other service employees whose contributions to society deserved recognition through access to basic benefits, including medical care, Ronaldo would reflect that discovering Ana's healthcare crisis had taught him that employment was meaningful only when it provided access to basic necessities, including healthcare. That individual success created obligations to address systematic problems that affected entire communities of working people. And that true security required ensuring that everyone who contributed through their labor could access the medical care they needed to maintain their health and continue their contributions to families and communities that depended on their work and their well-being.